We had anti-fouled in Greece earlier that year, six, 7 months before we left the boat, and the anti-fouling wasn't working very well. Anti-fouling in Europe is very expensive, and we had left the boat there, and we expected a bit of growth because we were having to scrape the bottom. When we got back after 6, 7 weeks away, we were somewhat surprised to find the amount of growth, which was up to 1 metre long in places. Certainly it was prolific. We had to go to the marina, to the Travellist, from where we parked to the Travellist. Fortunately, it was only about 500 yards away, because our maximum speed was 1.5 knots, flat out, and that was with a slight following breeze as well. And so we had, there's a guy here in a helmet scraping, and there's a huge mountain of stuff that they carted away. And then there was still the remains of barnacles left on the hull as they after I'd water blasted it. So we did what we don't normally do. We got a local lad, gave him a couple of $100, and he sanded the whole bottom of the boat for us, which was very nice. Then we had to find some more anti-fouling. Well, we bought the very best that's on sale in the Caribbean, and that is $600 per US gallon. So we put a couple of gallons of that on, and it has lasted reasonably well. We just did the boat again the other day. It lasted about 10 months pretty well this time. Starting to grow a few barnacles, but wasn't too bad. We had, is that the next one? Yep. This is Jolly Harbour still. Last year there were a lot of boats wrecked. Thousands and thousands of boats were wrecked in the Caribbean with those hurricanes going through, and we'll show you some of the pictures in a minute. And the insurers simply upped the premiums if you left your boat tied up in a marina, and that was all they did. But now, of course, after all the wreckage, you just can't get insurance in a lot of cases leaving a boat in a hurricane belt unless the thing's in a pit. And so they're developing pits. These are concrete lined ones. The ones in Fiji that they're digging, they're just a big hole in the ground, and they shove the keel down into that and put the hull on tyres. And it's been a very effective way of actually looking after boats that are hauled out in a hurricane. Because what they were doing up until then was they were putting lots of props underneath, steel props underneath, winding them up tight, and then welding rods between them to hold them in place, and then getting great concrete blocks in the ground, huge concrete blocks, and chain blocks, and tying the boats down. Even that wasn't enough to hold boats on the hard stand. So they seem to have got a system now where you can store your boat for the tropical season as hurricanes start to do more and more damage. We headed off from there. That's St. Bart's, actually. We called into St. Bart's, another place that's got a sort of a bit of a reputation. We had a wander around there, and it was very nice. There was one street that was had prices that were absolutely astronomical, really fancy stuff with all the bright names and things, and lots and lots of zeros on the prices. And apart from that, it was just like any other tropical place. So we weren't that taken with it. But a few hundred miles away from there is the British Virgin Islands. That was the marina office of the first marina we went to. As you can see, it's a steel frame building built to withstand hurricanes, and it's just been written off completely. We saw possibly a third of the houses had roofs off. There were buildings down. Other places, everything was normal, but we just stood and stared at the damage. It was really quite staggering and quite upsetting, actually. There were probably 10 or 12 marinas in the British Virgins, and half were wiped out completely. And after 6 months, when we came back, the others were perhaps operating at about 30% capacity. There are boats wrecked everywhere. I don't know. Here's one that was lifted up, and the stern's up on the road. It was a number of them survived on their moorings, but the masts were blown down. No sails on, nothing. Just the mast up there. Everything else off, and the masts were blown down. So that's the power of the wind at 150 knots. There are pontoons that were sort of upended, piled up on each other, and boats upside down, and we're talking 60-foot catamarans and things, just piled up on top of them in places. And one of the sad things was that we could see that there were a lot of boats that could have been salvaged and restored if they'd got onto it quickly, but 6 months later nothing had actually been done. That was a picture of a fast ferry. It's very fast. And there's roofs up there behind there. You can see roofs up there blown away. One of the things that we noticed walking around, things were sort of getting back to normal as best as they could, but virtually all the cars had lots and lots of dents in them and shattered windows. And there was just plastic in the windows, plastic sheeting in all the windows. What had happened was the cars had been parked there, and when you get 150 mile an hour winds, it picks up rocks and stones and gravel, and it fires it at the cars and smashes all the windows. So that was, so it was just devastating. Oh, that's a boat with a rig down. They were, wherever we looked, there were just more and more boats. In that picture there, that one, there were a couple of yachts there, and I don't know whether you can see this one here. It's all brown. They'd actually pulled that one out of the mud, and this one had been in the mud too, and you'd see the mud stains that were still on them, although they'd stuck them back on moorings. And all along here, just boats everywhere. In this photo, there are 11 boats, all of them over 40 feet, some of them 60, 70 feet. There are 11 wrecks in that particular photo. I counted them. Another bundle of them, that's a catamaran that's at least 60 feet long, just flipped upside down and dumped. The local government is trying to restore order, but it has no funds. There are lots of wrangles with insurance companies, but a lot of the boats are uninsured. And the owners just haven't come back. They've known their boats written off and they've just walked away. The UK has offered the BVOs, the British Virgins, a help package, but then the politicians, when we were there, they were all busy arguing about how they were going to spend this money when it came. And so everything was sort of delayed and delayed. And the people were quite frustrated. They're really quite resilient, nice people, trying to get back to normal. And they said that the only thing that is really going to help them is for people to come in their boats, spend some money, stay and buy produce or whatever they can. So from Antigua, here we headed up St. Bart's, the Virgin Islands, the British Virgins, the US Virgins, and then on to Puerto Rico, which of course is US territory, and then across Mona Strait here, and there's the Dominican Republic, and then Haiti, Jamaica, and down to Panama. So that's what I'll talk about for the next 5 minutes or so. That's our track. You've got to remember also that the sailing season in the Caribbean is the same as our summer season here. So it's not as good as when the boat was in the northern hemisphere. When it was winter there, it was summer here, and so it was good to come back here. The hurricane, the path of the hurricanes, Irma and Maria, came along. It just came just north of, that's Barbuda there, it came just north of there, right through the Virgin Islands, across Puerto Rico, and then on up. And that's where the two hurricanes that did all the damage last year, that's where they went along. We headed from the British Virgins, we headed off to the US Virgins, so we were back in USA again, where we had 10-year visas to get in and out, and that helped a lot. If you try and get in, and pass this on to anybody who's going to US territory, if you try to get into any US territory in the world on a private vessel or a plane, with one of the ordinary visas you get, ESTA visa, online, they don't let you in. Well, they do actually, but what happens is you'll find $1,000 and it takes about 3 days to get the paperwork through. you have to have a proper re-entry visa to get into the States in a private vessel. And it's easy enough to get, and so that's well worthwhile. We heard on the news last year the Puerto Ricans complained a bit about not enough help coming from mainland USA, but it was nothing like as bad as the British Virgins. Yeah, we actually hired a car and drove up to San Juan and had a look around the very historic island, and some of the large signs that you have over the motorways, they were blown down and lying in fields. Some traffic lights were still out, and a lot of big old trees were down, and there was a bit of damage in some of the marinas, but not that big a problem. We went into a marina there called Del Rey Marina at Fajardo, which is about the size of Westhaven, but they've got one big road right down the middle with all the pontoons off it. And what you do is it's such a long way to walk, you just caught up on the VHF, and they had a whole fleet of golf carts that would come trundling along with a chap driving it, and they'd be there in a minute or two, and so it saved a 15-minute walk, and you could go anywhere on these golf carts. They were part of the deal. It's got 4 large travel lifts there, and so in any case, we hired a car and drove off up the motorway to San Juan, and this is old San Juan, lovely town. That's just looking along the ramparts. It's a wonderful city. They speak basically Spanish only there. English is very, very much in a minority, but it feels much more like Mexico than it does feels like US, although it's US territory. Maybe Trump will build a wall or something. It's quite a big island, about 120 miles long, and we certainly enjoyed our stay there. This is around the south coast. We potted along the south coast to lots of bays and towns. Good cruising area, actually. We enjoyed it very much. That's the fire station. We got taken with that fire station. It's a lovely old fire station in the centre of Ponce, one of the cities, street scenes and things. So, Puerto Rico is a place that not many people go to or we hear about, but it was well worth a visit, quite enjoyable. Then, across the Mona Passage, and we headed across to Hispaniola. That's the big island there. Part of it's Dominican Republic, and we'd heard that a few negatives about the officials there, so we decided to skip there. We had to keep moving to get to Panama, and so we went on to Haiti instead. It's supposed to be the world's poorest country, and out at sea, way out at sea, we saw these dugout canoes dug out of a log, and we were looking at the sails, and the sails sort of looked a bit funny. And what's happened is they're making all their sails from old discarded sails that yachts have dropped or given to them when they're totally worn out, and they resew them and make these great lateen sails for their fishing boats. Obviously there's some spinnaker cloth in there somewhere, and they go out a long way fishing. They're very, very good they're very good sailors, and we were pretty impressed. Never saw a single outboard, and basically they don't have any motor transport. The Isle of Vache on the south coast of Haiti, there's a very nice anchorage there, and there are 3 or 4 yachts in there, so we went in there. Weren't troubled by officials or anything. They said, don't worry about clearing in and out. You stay here a week or so, no problem. If you go over to the mainland and to the capital city, you probably should call into the police station there. Other than that, don't bother. So we had we spent about a week there. Extreme poverty. There was one resort that had very high prices for even a cup of coffee, but just meters away from there, the poverty is so extreme. There are oxen dragging wooden ploughs. That's their way of farming. Still, no free education, no free medicine, but the island that we're on, Isle of Vache, once a week a doctor does visit, doesn't have any drugs or anything, but several thousand people live there and they get one visit from a doctor a week with no equipment. We actually left a bundle of stuff with them that we didn't need any longer. But yeah, nice little anchorage. And when we first arrived, we were surrounded by dugouts, and they were all seeking work. I think we had offers from about 7 people who all claimed to be absolutely qualified and top-notch stainless steel polishers looking for work. They weren't begging, they were just looking to try and sell stuff, and so we bought some fruit and bought a courtesy flag and all that sort of thing. They speak French, of course, because it was for 100 years a French colony, and French has stayed with them. After the first couple of days where they troubled us, they stayed away after that. We actually watched some of these fishing boats going out. As soon as there's a breeze comes up in the day, often it's late morning, you see them with a great big long pole poling out into deep water from the beach, in these very rudimentary boats. And as they come out, they unroll their sails, and then the pole that they've used is a great long gaff that goes from the heel of the mast all the way up, and once they actually get it sailing, they have a lot of sail on these boats. They're quite narrow. Most of them are dugouts. Some of them are sort of semi-plank built boats, but they fly. They go like the clappers, and they go a long, long way out to sea. It's quite impressive watching them, and they are very, very good sailors. We went walkabout and things, and at times, you know, the kids had come out. The housing there, some of it was okay, but quite a lot of the people lived under canvas over some bent trees and things. Just a bit of tarp to keep the rain off, and it did rain quite a bit, but kids would come along, and for a few coins they'd pose for a photo. We found a couple of entrepreneurial young fellas and we said, can we go for a bit of a tour? And they said, oh, we'll take you to the capital city of the island, which and that's the transport that they had. The roads are clay. There is absolutely no metal on them. They are very steep, mountain goat tracks in some places. And then the rain came down, and of course it all got very, very sticky and messy. This is the sort of subsistence living they have. That's the guy with his truck, donkey, and he obviously was farming something. The motorbikes got totally jammed up with mud, and so we had to walk a while they cleaned the mud out of the motorbikes. Both of them fell over. I didn't manage to stay standing. Karen did when she fell off hers. And then we arrived in the capital, which is, again, squalid. That's the only way you could describe it. There was no paving anywhere, but you didn't get... the street was clay and sand, but you didn't get very messy with it because it's all covered in plastic garbage, plastic containers, plastic sheet plastic bags and things, and you're just walking on this stuff. And then one of our guides said, oh, come into a restaurant for a beer. And we thought, oh, that sounds all right. Well, the local brew was very good, but it was just a concrete shack, the restaurant where somebody lived. It certainly had no signs out or anything. For transport, they use bigger boats with similar sails, and I think you can see there, their spars are actually just natural saplings, trees, and sometimes they actually put a bit of paint on them if they've got some spare paint or somebody's given them some paint, otherwise they're just all bare wood. And when the boat came in, well, there was one ute that we did see there. Other than that, everybody turned up with their donkeys and panniers to carry stuff around, and that's how they live. Really, it's a very, very poor country. There are tour guides. One of the things we did notice, there's no shortage of clothing. Obviously, clothing, they're given lots and lots of clothing help, but other than that, we left some piles of rope and various other things that was all snaffled up. But they're proud people. I'm very happy, but gosh, when you look at the history of Haiti, it's just coup, absolute, aside from no wonder there's poverty, because there's absolute corruption throughout government, and then as a colony of Spain and then France, it wasn't treated well at all. But it was Columbus who discovered it and set it up in the first place. So we moved on and went across to Jamaica. We had been once before, many, many years ago, and it's also a West Indian country, independent, but an awful lot more upmarket than Haiti, but still a lot of poverty there. When we had some new sails built in 2011, told our sailmaker, who I won't mention his name, to use only polypropylene for the bolt rope. Polyester for the bolt rope. But he used polypropylene and hid it under the tabling, and I didn't know about it. And of course, as soon as the tabling wears through on a batten pocket like that, it's 12-ounce cloth. As soon as the tabling wore through, the batten very quickly chafed through the polyprop, and of course you've got no bolt rope, and so when you tension the luff, the first thing that's going to happen is the sail's going to fall in half. So it really, we almost split the sail before I noticed it. I have heard that it's pretty common for a lot of sailmakers to use the cheaper stuff inside as bolt rope in a mainsail. So if you're having a mainsail built, just make sure that they put good stuff inside under the tabling. So the only remedy was a new bolt rope, and we couldn't find a sailmaker in Jamaica for love nor money. So we had to do the job ourselves, and so stretch the sail out and stretch some polyester out, some polyester braid out, some 8mm, and started stitching. 3 days. The temperature was about 40 degrees. It was sunny. The only good thing about it was we were at least on anchor, and so there was a little breeze, and even keeping the sun off, you can see it. So it was quite a long job, and it's fine. Sailmaker had a look at it and said, "Oh, just leave it alone. Don't touch it. It doesn't need anything more." And so, in any case, we did that, and then headed off down to. After 3 days, we actually enjoyed the Montego Bay Yacht Club, fabulous place, and we expected an easy voyage down to Panama, but it was a very, very confused sea with counter currents and twisting, varying currents, and one moment you're doing 4 knots, then you're doing 8, and the currents were all over the place, and of course a sloppy sea to go with it. We thought we'd just had a bad one, but a lot of yachts had been between Jamaica and Panama, and evidently this year it has been a challenge for everybody. The Atlantic end of the Panama Canal at Colon now has got a very good marina called Shelter Bay Marina. It's an old naval establishment, actually, is built. And so when you're waiting for a transit, and we actually waited nearly 3 weeks, partly we could have done it a little quicker, but we had some friends flying in from Colorado to join us, and so we had to wait that long. And if you do go to anchor at Colon off the flats there, like a lot of people have done and talked about in the past, there's really nowhere to leave your dinghy, and it's not set up for it. And the marina is quite reasonably priced. It's got an air-conditioned room and Wi-Fi and a swimming pool and all sorts of things, and a free bus off to the markets every day. And the bus is quite interesting because it actually goes across the canal. So you either end up, sometimes you go on a vehicular ferry, other times you cross first one lot of lock gates and then the new lock gates over the new bigger canal. So it's quite an interesting trip anyway. And we got an agent to help us go through. The agent wasn't very expensive, not in relation to the price of going through the canal, which for us was $1,300 US dollars, which is a lot to go through. I remember when we last went through, about 20 odd years ago, it was something like $10 US. So price has gone up a bit. But while we're waiting and we had these friends come in, we wandered up through the jungle. That's a monkey up a tree. There are lots of monkeys there, howler monkeys, and bird life is prolific. You can just wander through the jungle there. It's really quite safe, and there are paths and tracks, and we enjoyed that. We headed off up to the Chagres River on the Atlantic coast. That's just 10, 15 miles north of the Panama entrance. And that was actually considered at one stage as the entrance to the Panama Canal. It was a major port in its time, at the entrance to the Chagres River there. And way back, dating back 350 years, they had actually built a fort there. The Spanish had built a fort. And that's a historic site and well preserved and being looked after very well. So we went and had a wander around at those sort of places. That's a fort again. Not many tourists go to Panama, which is surprising because it's actually quite a nice country now. Not like it was 20 odd years ago where it was pretty rough. The Sentry Post. And then the morning came when we went out and picked up a pilot. We'd also we had our friends aboard, so that gave us most of the line hand. You've got to have 4 people on board plus the skipper, and then the advisor pilot comes on board as well. So there's 6 people on every boat. And with our friends from Denver, we actually needed one other person, so we actually hired a guy. Didn't cost too much, but their students supplement their education funds by acting as line handlers on yachts, and so I felt that was quite a reasonable thing to spend some money on. Good student job. They were aboard for 24 hours, so and I think we gave them $100. So it wasn't too expensive, and helped somebody get their education. That's our advisor coming on board really early in the morning, but just before dawn, and he seemed quite a nice bloke. He had a big breakfast, and then off we set up towards the canal itself. Now there's a big bridge called the Bridge of the Americas at the Pacific end, and that's a well-known bridge. They're putting another bridge across at the other end, the Atlantic end. That's a bridge under construction, so headed up through under there as the country develops, and it is developing quite a lot. We rafted up, to go into the first lock, we rafted up next to an Italian catamaran, and we found out that our advisor Roy was not really what we had quite expected. He had a motor mouth. Non-stop commands. Pull that rope, pull harder, pull. Full ahead, no, full astern, harder port. And it just sort of rattled the whole time. And he wasn't a lot of use, actually. I suppose he had the communications with the authorities ashore, but that was all he was useful for. The advisor on the Italian boat, he just sat there and said nothing. He left it all to our Roy to wear out his voice box. However, once we'd gotten to the first lock, the Italian skipper and I, he didn't speak any English and I didn't speak any Italian, but we soon worked out a system of hand signals where whatever Roy said, we just made hand signals and did what we wanted anyway, and so we had sussed out what was needed, and so Roy became very much ignored. He noticed it a few times, but there wasn't much he could do about it. We just went on and on. And out of we thought, well, okay, he must be paid quite a lot, but no, they only pay the advisors $120 a day for their work, and full day's work, and so what they get is they get fishermen and ferry boat skippers who are out of work and that sort of thing, and these are the advisors that take you through these days. When you're going into the canal, you go in behind ships, and there's a ship ahead, just kicking ahead of us. We're in the old locks, of course, the smaller ones, not the big new ones, and of course prop wash is something that you watch out for and have to meet with a bit of power yourself. And then the water bubbles in from underneath. It's not too turbulent. If you're a very small boat, I think you bounce around a bit, but had no problem. Up there on the left, up high, there's one of the mules, sort of railway, very, very heavy railway engines that sit on rails, and they actually hold the ships out from the side of the lock so they don't scrape their paint all the way through, which otherwise they would do. The new locks, we heard from a pilot who'd been there since the Americans were running it. With the new locks, they've done away with the mules in their wisdom, and the pilots hate it because the ships go scrape, scrape, scrape all the way through the canal now, without any sensible fendering. So they haven't got it quite right. The mules go up those tracks. That's one of the locks that we're about to go up on. And what else have I got here? Yeah, that's about all I wanted to say about that. Ashore, the line handlers, there's a guy walking up there. He throws down a heaving line which we attach our lines to, and as we move from lock to lock, we don't have mules, we have the line handlers. They just walk alongside of us and then hitch our lines on ashore as when the lock gates are closing. So up we went, and then out into Gatton Lake. Lots of traffic on Gatton Lake. Some boats passing you from behind, others going the other way. We just tugged the beacons. You don't go outside the beacons. You're guaranteed to hit things. There's it really is a lot of garbage on the bottom of Gatton Lake, trees and tree trunks and things, and it's only in the channels that you can actually operate. We had nothing much to say about 40 miles motoring across the lake. Fresh water, it takes a few hours. The only exciting thing that happened was we had a tug going the other way, and he went past at very high speed. And I think if you've ever seen a tug going at high speed, they push a lot of water. And he set up a great tsunami that we turned to meet. Well, being in calm like that, we'd actually taken the brake off the windlass so that we could use it for pulling in lines and things, and had a hook on the chain. But the bow went under about 18 inches. The lock came off, the hook came off the chain, and out went our anchor, which was pretty inconvenient. Roy didn't know at all what to do, but we soon sorted it out and got the anchor back aboard and carried on. That was about the only excitement, really. Then later in the day, we're into the locks first, and the ship's coming in behind. Now, I have no idea. I can't work out why you go down ahead of the ships. It just doesn't seem to make any sense, because the first lock was fine, but the second lock was renowned in Panama circles for damaging yachts. And we talked to 2 or 3 skippers who'd had their boats quite badly damaged in the second lock going down. When the ship comes in, somehow or other, in that lock, they actually set up a really big current of about 6 knots. And so, of course, you can motor back against it, but you're tied up, and with the lines stretching out pretty much sideways, and not very much fore and aft, of course, the loading on the lines is absolutely huge as you try and counter this current. And you've got to be quick, because the ships don't wait around. Once the yachts are in, the ship's coming in. And if there's any damage, then they just shrug and say, oh, well, bad luck. Eventually, we came down and got ourselves down back into the Pacific. And that was the first time in 7 years we'd been in the Pacific waters. And the launch then came alongside, picked up Roy. We were pleased to see him go. And he turned around and said, what a wonderful team we were. We moored right beside the canal for 3 or 4 days, 4 or 5 days. That's the Bridge of the Americas, which it looks like Sydney, doesn't it? And watched the shipping just going day and night. And one of the problems with the Bridge of the Americas here is that the bridge isn't high enough now. It was certainly, when it was built 40, 50 years ago, it was huge. But the modern container ships and shipping can't get underneath it, nor can the mega yachts of today get underneath this bridge. So they can't go through the Panama. But the bridge the other end that they're building now, that's much higher. What they're going to do about it, don't know. Panama City, this is part of the old city. I remember it from 25 years ago. It was pretty basic then. It has come on a long way. There's a lot more prosperity in Panama now. Good restaurants, nice areas. There's also some really slummy areas, but we were quite impressed with what they've actually done. And the apartments there, you know, they're pretty reasonable and reasonable sized. They have some modern architecture. That's well, I sort of had to look twice at that one, but that's a thing called the Biomuseum. They right into conservation and things, and that's their Biomuseum. I think, Karen, you visited it, didn't you? No, you didn't. Okay. In any case, and there are a lot of other really nice buildings that they have put up in the centre of the city. We're from the old. This is taken from the old city to the new city, and there are some really interesting, about 8 really interesting, beautifully designed buildings there. One over here that's actually sort of like a basalt pyramid. And it's all twisted and things. It's really some quite good design work there. So Panama was a bit of a treat compared from how it used to be. And then we were faced with the long drag across the Pacific. And Uncle Bob, I think you might have heard of him, said, go south. Don't go straight out, because now in mid-May, in late May when we left, we had sou'westers, and he said, you're going to get sou'westers. So I wanted to leave on the 14th of May. But a certain person had a special birthday on the 15th of May. And with our friends, she had said she definitely did not want to spend another birthday at sea. So we had to stay a few more days. And so I found out what the number one restaurant was in Panama City. And there are about 3,000 of them. And so we booked in for the number one restaurant, which I just ignored the prices. You just got to do these things, don't you? And it was then when I found out where we had to go that it was in a place called Trump Tower. And that particular word is an obscenity in our family. And so our friends from Colorado, Dave and Beth, and we had a bit of a chat about this. Well, what's she going to say when we get there? And she finds it's Trump Tower. But in any case, we were saved. A few months before, Trump Tower had been sold, and it had changed its name. So all was well, and she enjoyed the lobster. So off we went. Now, the Galapagos are about a quarter of the way between Panama and the Marquesas over here, Fatahiva, Nukuhiva, and the Marquesas Island. And in the past, you know, you'd think, well, go to the Galapagos, it's a fabulous place, and I heard all about it and things. We did actually go there once in the 90s. But less than a quarter of the yachts that are now heading across the Pacific go there. There are 2 reasons. First of all, they charge about $2,000 if you want to stay a week or 10 days, and you can go to 3 named places only. If you call in there just to buy fuel, there's a surcharge of $1,000 just to stop in and buy fuel. If you have a genuine breakdown and they check on it and they agree, well, that's okay, but you can only stay about 48 hours to fix your boat. So those are distinct disincentives. The second one is we actually talked to people who'd been there. We went to an evening like this where somebody who'd been there and spent 3 weeks there on a tour in a yacht gave us a big long talk. And they saw a few things that were interesting, a few tortoises, 1 or 2 iguanas, and 3/4 or 7/8 of their presentation was on swimming with the dolphins, and that was it. So it's perhaps blown up a little bit out of proportion to what it is. In other words, it's not overwhelming when you get there. I can recall going there 20 odd years ago and feeling it was a bit like walking around on Rangitoto. It was scoria, and we saw some volcanoes and things, but there wasn't. It wasn't all that good. So into the sou'westerlies we headed. Bob had warned us about these sou'westers, reasonably light, but we went and bought some cheap fuel drums or some cheap plastic drums and stuck another 400 litres of diesel on deck. So we had 1,000 litres to make sure that we could motor sail if we had to quite a lot of the way. And off we went and headed south and it was we were down on the coast of Ecuador before we turned and headed west, and motor sailing a lot of those first legs. In fact, we probably motor sailed 3/4 of the way to the Galapagos, which is 900 miles, nearly 1,000 miles. But that was okay. We had the fuel, and then the breeze slowly started coming in. Initially southwest and then south, and then backed around, and we were able to head down south of the Galapagos Islands, as Bob suggested. And we were on our way, and we've actually done a bit of work on the rig on Victoria. Here we've got a mainsail out one side, a very long pole. We've got a pole that's 1.3 times the length of the foredeck to pole out headsails, because the biggest problem of poling out headsails, you can't get them flat enough to stop the boat rolling. So we have long poles out there, and a lot of the time, when the wind's aft, we run without a mainsail on at all, and we just have a genoa and a jib poled out the other side. And this was a really handy rig, because you can wind the pole set up separate, and the sheet on the genoa just runs through the end of the pole, and so you can actually, when squalls come through and things, you can just wind down some sail, wind up, and so we could actually keep the boat in that sort of sweet spot around 7.5 knots, and just go up and down while other boats are trying to reef their mainsails. Mast furling mainsails are not easy to reef. A number of them actually admitted that whenever they had to get some mainsail off, they rolled up their headsail, went head to wind in the middle of the ocean, rolled it in, and then bore away again. And what a tedious job that is when you've just got two of you. Whereas we could just roll in and out and keep the boat moving. And I hadn't really had a chance to test out whether we were doing well with our system or not. And but this time we left a whole lot of boats left Panama together, and there were two boats in particular that we were sailing with, both Beneteau 50s, new boats, or relatively new boats, only a few years old. And we left a day behind them, both of those boats, and we came in 2 days ahead of them at the Marquesas, which was very annoying, because one of them was fully crewed with a full crew. And we'd put time on a lot of other boats. And we didn't use the spinnaker at all. We just used our headsails and rolled them in and out. So that was quite happy. Across the Pacific, 28 days it took to run off the just over 4,000 miles going across. We had about 3 or 4 interesting things happen. Other than that, it was tedious and boring. I had to regas the freezer, which was full of food, and fortunately that worked. I had to put a spare alternator on when the alternator stopped charging, and that was okay. The only other thing of any real note was that our genoa sheet parted close to the Parrot Beak in about 20 knots of wind, and we didn't have the mainsail on, we had a jib on the other side, and it parted, and before we could pull in the other sheet or do anything, it had somehow managed to do a real spinnaker wrap, although it's heavier cloth, and it had gone both ways around the forestay. And we tried for an hour, somehow or other, to wind it one way or the other, and nothing worked. Whatever we did, it just got tighter. And so, coming on dusk, we were faced with the only thing to do was to go up there and sort it out. And so, boat rolling pretty heavily at this stage, because we weren't going very fast, and there was a good sea running. Managed to get up in the boatswain's chair about the third, maybe halfway up the forestay, and get it unwrapped, which was, well, it sort of got me out of the dishes that night, didn't it? We had a few squalls go through, and with the boat open at the back end of the cockpit, and the rain would drive in, quite a nice squall, 30 knots, something like that, would come pounding in, so we'd roll in a bit of headsail, and the rain was inconvenient, but we got plenty of that, and we did actually find use for an umbrella. It kept the rain out from going down the hatch. So every boat should have an umbrella. 28 days on, we arrived at Fatuhiva in the Marquesas. And now the Marquesas are spectacular islands, no doubt about it. They're volcanic, these great spires and overhanging lava cliffs and basalt and things. Really very nice. It was pretty wet when we were there, but the problem is there's no surrounding reef. So every anchorage anywhere in the Marquesas is a bit rolly. And then when you get a few boats in there, and it's quite deep, you need plenty of swinging room, and so it gets a little bit tricky. But we stayed a few days in Fatuhiva. There's no customs there or anything, but the French don't mind. They know you visit there on the way, and that's okay, just so long as you tell them when you get somewhere. And they're quite relaxed about it. And off to Nukuhiva, went up through some other islands, and in Nukuhiva we actually hired a vehicle, a ute actually, and went driving all around. And we'd got free pamplemousse and Fatuhiva at Bay of Virgins, and we actually went ashore and had a dinner with a family there. We also, people who go through Tahiti find they have to pay this bond. There's a bond that you normally pay on arrival, which is equivalent to everybody's airfare back to home. Well, it's not so bad if you're going to New Zealand, but if you're going to England, you've got to put up this cash bond of a couple of $1,000 per person, and some people find that pretty inconvenient. But we did discover something this time. If you have travel insurance, you don't have to pay the bond. You get a letter exempting you from the bond, provided you produce travel insurance. But they don't tell you that. You have to find that out for yourself. So anybody going to Tahiti, it's worth knowing. Nukuhiva is quite a big island, and it rises up steeply, and we had to back and fill to get around some of the corners and things. And there's a big plateau right up in the centre of the island, which you can't tell from down below. And so it's and there's quite a lot of farming goes on there, but it's the back and beyond. There's no marinas, there's no lift out, there's not much. You really are isolated there, although you can get stuff flown in, parts flown in, but you're definitely you're on the anchor, and that's the only option. But one of the things about Nukuhiva we discovered was it's got a civilization that goes back thousands of years, and they've just sort of started opening up some of the stone work that's there. And there was an American crew from one of the American magazines doing a doco there, and so we had to keep out of their way. And so we spent quite a few hours wandering around that area. They've found all these stone walls and things, and they've actually built really quite reasonable thatched areas over the top, and to protect them. So it's sort of almost like a museum as you wander around, with carved pillars and carved stone, that's carved basalt, and in some cases carved lava that they've erected, and goes back literally thousands of years. So there's a lot of work to be done there about Polynesian history. But certainly spectacular spires and basalt cones of volcanoes. Quite a nice place. We're quite happy to head off and down to Whakarava, which is an atoll, completely different, of course, the atolls. Whakarava is a very big atoll. It's probably, it's as big as Waiheke. And lots of anchorages in there. Some lovely food, of course, good roads, because it's French. The French keep pouring money in. That up in the islands, of course, the Pacific Islands, we've been there, know that on Sunday they all head off to church and they sing lustily, and it's actually pretty good singing too. And so this was Sunday at Whakarava. Everybody was out and about, and we had a different sort of a Sunday, but we could have Sunday every day there. And Karen really enjoyed being there. She didn't want to move on because she'd found this little old lady who had a tiny little cottage, well, no, just a shed really, on the side of the main road away from anywhere else, and she served these delicious. She sold these delicious pastries, the really good French stuff. And so every day Karen would sort of find some excuse that she had to go to the supermarket, which was a sort of a mini market thing, and would always come back with this bag of goodies. And we found out that this little old lady who had retired from being a formal pastry cook in Paris, she had retired to Whakarava, where she spent about 2 hours a day running her shop, and that was her retirement income. So I had a bit of trouble getting away from there. All of the tour motis are lovely like that. Lots of diving, snorkeling, lovely places to be. Now, that was Whakarava. Now, this is, we went on to Tahiti. This is not Tahiti, this is actually Moorea in this picture, but we went into Papiti, and you used to be able to anchor off the town there, but no longer. There's a marina there, but the marina isn't overpriced for Tahiti, that's surprising. And a lot of things there weren't all that expensive, provided you didn't eat in a classy restaurant or want accommodation, because accommodation is absolutely horrendous. But so we actually stayed a week in the marina, got a good rate, and that was good. We could wander about and have a look and things. And one morning, right at dawn, there was a huge cacophony as all these cars revved up and went roaring along the road and tooting their horns and shouting and things. Oh, what the heck is going on? We knew they had a referendum coming up, and we thought, maybe they've gone independent, which wouldn't actually be a good idea. But we thought, then suddenly the penny dropped. They'd just won the World Cup. So there's a lot of beer being drunk, that's for sure. Cook's Bay in Moorea is just as nice as it always has been. Lovely indented anchorages in Moorea. And then we headed on north to places like Huahine, beautiful island. Wondered about the cost of these bures on the beach, but at $700 a night we decided we'd stay on the boat. That's the way a lot of tourism has gone in the whole of the Pacific now. There's restaurants where people had retired and were just running a restaurant in there when they'd taken their families out of the hurly-burly of France and gone down there and were living in an idyllic life. And the prices, I'm talking about top restaurants, were cheaper than New Zealand, that's for sure. We had a number of places we could go and explore. This is went up a river in the dinghy for couple of miles and potted along through the area there on Taha, and eventually we headed off. Stopped by Bora Bora for a look because it's pretty famous. But I think that if I was going back, I think that there are islands better than Bora Bora, which is just full of expensive tourism. It's an expensive tourism trap now. And then on across to Vavau, the Northern Tongan group, where many of you have been. Loved it, of course. It's an absolutely idyllic cruising ground, and rightly has lots and lots of charter boats working out of there. But there's so many islands and so many places to go there inside the sheltered outer reef that it doesn't feel crowded at all. It is actually a good place to go. And then finally we went off to Fiji, and Fiji is a place that we spent some time back in the 70s when we had a little 31-footer that we went and spent a year up there, and we were teaching a little Woolacott boat, and back in the 70s. And we hadn't really cruised Fiji much since then. I've been back on a lot of races and up and down round about, but never stayed there long, so we spent a month and a half there. Tourism has become pretty high-end market. A lot of places that once upon a time there was nothing. Now there are all these expensive places ashore, and they are pricey. Served by seaplanes, and so there's no shortage of people to come and to come and spend money there. We caught up with Bob at Flunky Fish Resort, and that was very pleasant. He gave us a lot of good ideas, and then of course we cruised around there. We had a grandson come and stay with us for a week, and other friends came and stayed, and so it was pretty easy cruising around Fiji, where the beaches are good and you can get shelter at the western end even when the weather's bad. And then we said to Bob, about beginning of November we'll head back to New Zealand. Having decided to do that, we did toy with the idea of going to Australia at one stage, but getting a bit old for it. And so in any case we thought we'd go back to New Zealand, and Bob emailed us and said there's a BFA over New Zealand, BFH, or BFA, a big fat anticyclone or a big fat high over New Zealand. You should go. Well, I didn't show anybody the email I got from Bob, but they all looked at the weather and listened to the weather, and the customs were rushed off their feet as people were running in saying, I want to go, and a lot of boats left at the same time and came down with a week trip for pretty much everybody, 6, 7, 8 days, and the first few days were very, very boisterous. It was a full 30 knots on the beam, and you'd certainly do slam around in those conditions. We actually buttoned off a bit because I had sore arm and a few things like that to contend with, but and it sort of died down a bit after a while, and as we headed south and arrived in Opera, and in 2 days between Opera, or mainly in Opera, but Whangarei as well, and some even came through to Auckland, over 50 boats arrived in 2 days from the islands, and the customs up there is just saying that's just unheard of, but everybody had taken the leap and arrived back. And so we potted into Opera. The wind had died by then, and so we motored the last 100 miles to end our 7 years of a retirement trip, 60,000 miles, about 40 countries. And now, if anybody wants to buy a boat, it's just run in, and it's had one careful owner. So thank you. Oh yeah, that's a good idea. Basil.
You referred to having travel insurance.
Yes.
Was this insurance of a boat or insurance of
Oh no, it's totally separate. Travel insurance, like you buy when you go on a trip. You sometimes get it on your credit card if you buy the trip there. But no, we were paying, even at our age, it wasn't too bad. We had full medical travel cover, and I think for the pair of us it was certainly under 3,000 for a year.
But who did you get it with?
Through a broker, and it was actually placed with Alliance. Yeah, it's a typical health insurance, travel insurance.
I looked for that and I just couldn't find it.
Oh, it's there.
For cruising.
It's there, but you've got to actually get the blue water extension, which costs a little bit more. If you simply take the standard travel insurance, it says nothing on a private boat.
Correct.
But you can actually organise it through a broker who's a yachtsman. And if you want the name, I might as well tell you, it's Don Grayson and Associates, whom you know. So go and bail him up, he'll sort you out. But you get the blue water extension. You're not covered in the middle of the ocean. You can't get a helicopter out for nothing to take you out because you've got a sore finger. But once you're more than 50 miles out, it doesn't really cover you, but it certainly covers you for everything else.
Okay, thank you.
Can you tell us something about the boats, the design?
Oh, yeah, okay. Well, she's 30 years old, wooden boat, 3-skin carryover, laminated ribs. I got a guy called John Goldwater to draw the lines for us, and he's now dead. But he drew the lines and we did pretty much all the rest, all the scantlings and everything else, and put it together in the 80s and launched in 88, and I've done about 150,000 miles since then. But she's displaces really light. She's about 17, 18 tons, running about 21, 22 at the moment with all the junk on board. She's 14-foot beam, 50 feet on deck, 40 feet on the waterline, and draws, well, 1.8 meters theoretically, but right now it's near at 2. There's 5.5 tons in the keel. It's a keel that's, I'd call it a long fin. So it's got all the advantages of a long keel boat, but it's also got a separate skeg and rudder. And yeah, she's got a big rig, and so there's plenty of sail there for light weather and easily gotten down. And she's looked after us pretty well. We've been all over the place. She's just simply chain and sprocket leading to spectra over a number of pulleys and onto a quadrant, and then a ram and a hydraulic ram and an autopilot. Yeah.
Looks a fine ship.
Yeah. See me afterwards.
Look at the cabin.
Yes.
Gorgeous banking on like 150 mile days, 160 mile days. What's your kind of comfortable average to see?
150.
150,
Yeah, 150. Now, some days it depends on the conditions. You might get. It's disappointing to be down in the certainly under 130 is very disappointing.
Yeah.
You get a number in the 130s, 140s. You get a lot of days 160, 170. That's just with service. Before, when we cruised, when we had more people on board, or when we were racing, because we raced to Japan a couple of times, as you know, and up the islands and things, our best days runs were up in the 200s, 208, 210. And I remember the last time we came across from Panama to the Galapagos, we were sitting on steady 180, 190 a day, 195 a day, but we had a kite on, and we had 5 of us sailing the boat. No, this is without the current. This was, she'll genuinely do 200 a day when we're racing, and you've got a full crew working the boat. But and so in those days we used to sort of do about 170. But this last trip, by and large, we thought 150 a day, and it pretty right. That'd be right, wouldn't it, Bob?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. He knows because we kept telling him where we were.
Very good. Thank
Okay.
you very much. Another round.
Okay, thank you.